And welcome back at another tutorial about the Korg Pa5X. In this tutorial we are going to take a look at adding sampled loops to our Pa5X. We will create pads with house loops, percussion loops and acoustic loops. Also we are going to replace the drums from a song style with an acoustic drum loop. For this example we are going to use the song Purple Rain from Prince and replace the MIDI drums with the acoustic drum loop from the real drummer of Prince. So this will be a really interesting tutorial that will add a lot of value to your Pa5X once you know how to do this. But first, an important message. When you start with these things, it's absolutely necessary that you have created a backup of your Pa5X. This is because you are going to add a lot of samples to it, and if you are making a mistake it will take a lot of time to lead every sample manually. So be sure that you have a backup of your Pa5X before you are going to try the things I show in this tutorial. And on my YouTube channel there's an in-depth tutorial for that, how to safely backup and load your backups on the Pa5X. So if you didn't do that, watch that first before trying the things I'm going to show you. So enough with the introduction, let's start with the loops tutorial. So to start with the loops, I've added a few loops to my Korg Pa5X on the Korg disk. You can also use your USB stick for that. That doesn't really matter because you are going to create the samples in the internal memory of the Korg. But you need a few loops to start with this tutorial. So when you are going to work with samples, you are going to press the Rec Edit button. And on the screen you will see a section called Sampler. And when you are going to add samples to your Pa5X, you need to do that in the sampler. So press the Sample Edit button. So now we are in the sampler section. And in the sampler section is a really interesting area because we can create our own new sounds over here. We can create new drum kits and we can create loops in here. Well, I've emptied my complete sampling area, so there is nothing in there anymore. In your case, probably there will some samples in there, but you can add them to your existing sample library. So let's add a loop to the sampler. Press the menu button on the screen and select Load Sample. Now we are on the screen with the disks, and I've copied my samples to the sample directory. And I have two subfolders in here, one with loops and one with one-shot drum hits. We are going to import a loop now. So press the loops section on my screen. And here you see a couple of loops that I've added to this system. I have some ambient drums, some house drums, some percussion drums and an acoustic example. So first let's load up a house drum. So let's use the house drum full 124. And what I do, that's my naming convention, I say what kind of drum it is. If it's a full loop or a top loop means that the kick is missing, so that you can add different kicks to them. The last part is the BPM of that loop. I prepare that in the DHW, but you can download them from the internet and the system itself will detect the tempo of the loop. Well, we have a 124 loop now. I've selected it and I press the menu again and I say load. So now we have loaded the drum sample into the sampler and we can listen to it by pressing a note. So that's the sample, and to use it in the Pa5X in any tempo we have to slice it. And you can do that by pressing the menu button. Now you see the option Time Slice and we are going to activate that. Now you see a lot of information. It says the BPM. It determines the BPM and we know that this is a 124 BPM. So that means that it's not one measure but 4 measures. So we are going to say, hey, we are going to slice this drum sample and it's 4 measures and it's 124 BPM. And in the time slice section you can determine the amount of samples it's going to split this loop in. So press the slice button and now you see all these kind of blue lines. And every part between the blue line will be a separate sample in your sample memory. And when I slow down the tempo, it will automatically determine the new start point of this blue line in your style. You need to audition this, and you can do that by pressing the upper octave twice and set it to -2. And that means that this section now is the audition feature. And if you want to hear it in the full tempo, you can press it over here. And now you hear all those slices again. And when you want to hear it on 50% tempo, you do it an octave lower, the C note. And you hear that all these samples are played now in the slower pace. And if you want to do it a little bit slower, so you also hear that when you play it on 50%, so on 62 BPM at 50%, you will hear this spaces in between those elements. Now this is a house drum loop, and I'm not going to use that in a specific slow tempo. But if you want to solve that, you can use the extend feature. But for now, this is fine. If you want less samples, you can increase the threshold, and you see that there are less lines created for this element. Now, what does that mean? It will add less samples to your Pa5X, but it will also mean that it's going to try to keep the tempo with less samples. So if you are going to listen to it on the normal tempo, you will hear the original drum loop, which is fine. But if you are going to listen to it on 50%, you will hear a very strange rhythm. And that's because the parts in the middle don't have separate sections. So it immediately goes to the next split point. So always try to find a mixture between what is acceptable or not, depending on the user situation that you are after. So this is a good default threshold, the number 10, and that means that you will get 40 samples for this specific drum loop. Okay, let's save this drum loop now to the internal system. Press save, and we can give it a name. Now, we know this is the house drum full, and I like to give it a name LP, so that I know that these are samples from a loop. And we are going to store it in a specific drum kit. So select one, for instance the user drum kit 3. Let's use page 3 for that. You see also that on the Korg samples loops directory, where the original sample is, there will be a standard MIDI file created, and that's essential because when we are going to save it, every slice is on a specific position. So we need this MIDI file to recreate this loop. So press OK. Are you sure? Yes. So that's all. Now, if we are going to look at all the samples, you will see that a lot of samples are added to your system. 40, 0 till 39, the number of slices. And these are now in your Pa5X. So that drum loop is ready. So if you are going to audition that specific drum kit, go to one of the upper keys by pressing the keys and the upper one. Go to the user DK3, and here's our LP house drum full loop that we just created. So we've loaded the house drum full loop now, and when we press upper octave -1, then it starts on this C# note, the drum loop. And you hear all 40 samples now that are available. And it stops over here. So that are a lot of samples, 40. And you have no idea how to play them, that it's an instant loop. So it's a good way to create your own drum kits from loops. But we are going to create a new pad now with these loops so that we can use it in any style that we want. And that's also really easy to do. Press the Rec Edit button, create new pad, and we are going to say, hey, in the menu button, import a groove, the second one. And we are going to say, hey, select from MIDI file, and it's on the loops section now. And there we have our LP house drum full mid file. And this MIDI file was created by the multi-slicer. And when we select this one and we press the execute button, then now when we press the exit button, so we can audition it by pressing the play button. So it knows everything it needs to know. So save the pad in your own pad library, and we are going to call this loop house drum full. Okay, now we're done, and we have created a new loop, and we are going to select one, and let's use the remember funk style, and let's load up pad 1 in our own user area. And I'm doing this quickly because this is all covered in previous tutorials, how you create and work with pad sounds. And we see the LP house drum full over here. Select it, and be sure that you don't have any effects on top of them. Now we see that we have assigned it to the FX1 that has a default of 18 in this specific style, which goes to the overb over here in Master FX A. So we delete that, and if we play that now, you hear that loop on 85 BPM. And if we are going to increase it, and here we have our own drum loop. So that's really cool, because this way we can disable the drums and percussion from the original Remember Funk library, and we can play our own tunes with it now. And it runs always in sync with the complete style. So it's a little bit lower in volume. So really cool, and works flawlessly with the included style. So now we have created our own drum loop and added it to that specific funk style. So that's the procedure to create pads with loops. But sometimes you also want to add your own drum loops or other loops to a specific style. So let's load up one of my own styles. And we are going to use the Purple Rain for this. And when we are trying that song, let's go to the style, then it has a default PopKit style. And you hear this specific drum pattern. Well, nice try, but I rather would have the original drummer of Prince playing the drum parts in my song style. And I can do that. On YouTube there is a tutorial from the original drummer of Prince where he plays all these kind of patterns, and I've sampled it from YouTube and added a loop from that to my Korg Pa5X. So let's create the loop. Press Rec Edit, go to the sampler, by pressing the Sample Edit button. Go to the menu on your screen, select Load Sample, and we are going to say, hey, this Prince Purple Rain loop is something we are going to import. Press File, or press the menu button, press Load. And here is the drum sample. We are going to the time slice and slice it. And we see nice lines on every part. And we also see that it's 60 BPM. But in this case, I want to make it a little bit faster. And it's a 120 BPM. So we are going to say it's a 2-measure line. Press Save. And Prince Purple Rain LP. And select it on this free slot. And the MIDI file for that is created in the loop section. So now we have that Prince Purple Rain, and if you are going to look in the samples, you see all these separate elements added to your sample memory. And this is also something I'm experimenting a lot now by explaining it, and you see that the amount of samples is increasing quite rapidly. So it's important that you have that backup and always can refer to a different state till you know what you do. And in the memory info you can see how many samples you have used and how many memory you still have left. So that's also possible. Okay, the Prince drum is now in there, but it isn't in the song style. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, it's really easy. We are going to use only this drum track for that, and we press the Rec Edit button, and we say Style Edit, and it's now on the drum track. And we are going to replace this drum track with that specific loop by pressing the menu button, going to the Import Export, and over here we also have the Import Groove element. So we are going to select the LP Prince Purple Rain MIDI file for that. So select it, and now we are going to say, hey, the drum track for variation 1, CV1 is going to be replaced with that Purple Rain drum track. So execute, yes. We are going to do this also for variation 2, variation 3 and variation 4. And now the drum track is completely replaced in that drum track. So you see that it's assigned now to the LP Prince Purple Rain drum kit that we created for every variation. And that's basically all you have to do. Now we are going to save the style with a new name. Purple Rain Real Drummer. Okay. So we have replaced the drummer now with the Real Purple Rain drummer. So let's try it how it sounds. So I played a little bit differently because otherwise I can get a copyright strike on my channel, and I don't want that. So these are two ways to work with loops. The one is that you can create your own pads, and the other one is that you can use the drum loops in your styles by replacing drum items or percussion items or any item of your style with your own imported loops. And I've only added now for the Purple Rain, for instance, only one loop. But of course you can create different kind of loops for the fills, for the variations, for the breaks, the intros and endings. That's up to you, but the procedure is still the same. So that's it for now. So hope to see you again in the next tutorial.